They found him slumped at the base of the grave, one hand still clutching the stems of crushed wildflowers, the other resting gently against the name carved into the worn stone, Lieutenant J. Moore, USMC. Here, 1968. It had rained the night before. His coat was damp from the wet grass. His hat had blown a few feet away in the wind. He was alone. No one saw the final rise of his chest, or the quiet way his eyes closed for the last time. The coroner assumed he was homeless. The police figured he was just another forgotten soul. But when they opened his jacket and found an old envelope, faded, weathered, addressed not to a person, but to a unit designation, everything changed. 3 days later, a call to the Pentagon. The operator asked for the grave's coordinates. Then silence. That's where it began. But before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from. If you believe no soldier should be remembered by accident, like and subscribe, because this story starts with a man everyone forgot and ends with a salute that echoed through Arlington. His name was Ray Navarro. Most knew him as the quiet janitor at Westport High. Khaki uniform, wireframe glasses, a limp that made him easy to ignore. He fixed chairs, swept floors, replaced chalk trays. To teachers, he was odd. To students, invisible. Once, a vice principal asked if he'd thought about retiring for safety reasons. Ray just nodded and kept cleaning the windows. But every Sunday, before the church bells rang, while the town still slept, Ray drove 15 miles down Route 19 to an old cemetery near a truck stop. He opened the rusty gate and always closed it gently. Behind him, no camera, no hashtags, no fanfare, just a man, carrying wild marigolds or dandelions to a grave no one else ever visited. The headstone leaned slightly, half choked by moss, the name blurred by decades of rain. Ray would clear the vines, brush off the dirt with his sleeve, and whisper the same 6 words: "You're not forgotten." Not this week. Then he'd sit, sometimes writing in a worn leather notebook, sometimes just watching the trees sway like ghosts, remembering their own names. What no one knew was that Ray had never even met Lieutenant Moore. He'd found the grave by accident, searching for his cousin's headstone. The name, the silence, it didn't sit right with him. A fallen Marine with no flag, no flowers, no visitors. Not while Ray Navarro still had breath. So began the ritual. Every Sunday. No exceptions. Not after his stroke. Not even when the VA stopped returning his calls. At school, no one asked. To them, he was background noise, a mop and a name tag. But that changed the day a jogger paused outside the cemetery gate. He saw Ray kneeling, hands pressed to the stone like a prayer. He took a picture. No malice, just curiosity. The caption read: "Man leaves flowers at same forgotten grave for 10 years. It went viral before Ray even got home. He didn't know what going viral meant. He still used a flip phone, paid bills at the post office, but someone in uniform saw that photo. Someone who had known Moore. And by the time they traced the image from cemetery to town to school, Ray had already collapsed at the grave, flowers in hand, peace in his chest. A VA nurse later dismissed him as a lonely old man. But when the Pentagon opened the envelope in his coat, the one labeled classified, to be opened only upon death, they found a service record, redacted in parts: 2 bronze stars, 1 silver, a commendation signed by a general who disappeared in 1974, and at the bottom, in Ray's handwriting, "I didn't save him, but I never forgot him." That's where the real story begins, with silence, remembrance, and a grave. I'd just gotten back from the cemetery, boots still wet, coffee cooling on the table, when the black sedan pulled up. 2 Marines in full dress blues, not recruits, senior brass, collars shining, a presence like a storm that had learned to wear silence. "Mr. Navarro?" I nodded. "We'd like to talk about Lieutenant Moore." Hearing that name aloud, it hit like a weight. I stepped aside. When Marines show up 50 years too late, you don't ask questions, you brace. They opened a folder. Inside was a photo, black and white. Our squad outside Key San, soaked, smiling. The kind of smile you only wear when you've survived something that should have killed you. Moore stood at the center, hand on my shoulder, helmet pushed back. We made it another day. The older Marine tapped the folder. Do you understand what this is? I said nothing, just stared at the crease in the paper. My own handwriting faintly visible. He died alone. He shouldn't be remembered that way. That's what I left behind when I walked away from it all. The medals, the parades, the speeches that meant nothing. But Moore never let us fall apart. Not when the radios failed. Not when the jungle tried to swallow us whole. He stood, always, until that final ambush. I asked them, why now? The taller one didn't blink. Because you remembered. And the Corps doesn't forget those who stand watch even when no one sees. Turns out, Moore had no family left, no next of kin. His legacy buried in microfilm and redacted reports. Until someone you decided to kneel at that grave every Sunday and whisper 6 words. That photo triggered a facial recognition alert. Within hours, they weren't just looking at Moore, they were looking at me. We'd like to change that, they said. I almost laughed. All I did was sit on some grass. You did more than most do for the living, the Marine said. There was a ceremony. I didn't expect the bagpipes, the dress blues stretching down the hill, the riderless horse, the drone camera circling like a vulture trying to package grief in 4K. But I wore my jacket, the old one with the torn cuff. Met them at sunrise. They'd restored the grave, polished the stone. Ray engraved the name James M. Moore, 1st Lt. USMC 1940 for 1968. Never forgotten. A fresh flag, a wreath, and sitting atop the headstone an envelope, wax sealed. My own handwriting. You're not forgotten. Not this week. The colonel handed it to me. Said they found it during restoration. We thought you should have it back. I didn't need to open it. I already knew. Later, a young man approached. Civilian clothes, a limp, a patch. That red rock my dad served with Lieutenant Moore, he said. He always told me if I ever met the man who remembered him. He handed me a photo, one I'd never seen. Me and Moore, sitting on sandbags, boots off, smiling. On the back, my name, the watchman. When taps played, I stood, not from pride, from duty, because Moore deserved more than memory. He deserved music, honor, noise. They fired 3 volleys, each crack a punctuation mark. Then they folded the flag slow and sharp, and placed it in my hands. He had no next of kin, they said. You're it now. Beneath Moore's name, a new line had been etched in honor of Raymond Navarro. For 10 years of unsung duty. Didn't cry, not until I saw the kids. Little ones, 10 or 11 each, carrying a single wildflower. One by one, they laid them at the grave, not because they knew more, but because someone told them a story about a man who never forgot. That night, I opened the shadow box, pinned Moore's photo beside my own, and wrote one last note in the notebook I'd carried for decades. The watch ends, but the memory stands. I set it on the windowsill and watched the wind move through the trees like a whisper passing through generations.